Welcome, ladies and nerds, to another edition of the NerdWatch Nation for, I guess, what is it, the second week of August? Yeah, second week of August. I am here with Professor Barry this morning. We are, or our morning, as a matter of fact, when we're recording. So we're with Professor Barry this morning. How you doing, sir?
Doing good.
Well, listen, Professor Barry, it's not you and me anymore. We're not alone like we normally are. We brought another geek into the fold, another nerd into the fold this morning.
The cult is growing.
The cult is growing, and we'd like to introduce you to him. We like to call him Collector J. Collector J, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Well, listen, hey, thanks for joining the show. Could you tell everybody a little bit about your nerd credentials?
Well, first thing is, again, happy to be here.
Good.
Just started recently in the comic book world and rebuilding that back up. Really into the Legos. I hate to say it, my wife, she kind of shakes her head, but...
You're a Lego guy.
Lego guy, yep.
Wow. How long have you been a Lego guy?
Well, there's a story I have on Legos. It was actually when I was 9. It was how I was kept busy while my mom was dying from cancer.
Wow.
So shortly after that, I lost touch with it. But over the last 3 years, I've reconnected with it, and it's kind of fun. You know, I got a nice little collection that takes up most of the room and the closets. But
was that something that your mom and yourself shared while she was going? Oh no, it was just something to get you off.
To get me into the hospital hallway.
Oh.
I was building it, you know, and then but lost all that. They got sold for whatever reason, and then got back into it. They weren't quite as fun when I was 8, 9 years old, but Star Wars, superheroes, Ghostbusters, vampires, all that stuff.
Is it more? So it's more fun for you now that you picked it back up.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a little connection to the past, and it's fun. I into photography. I do a little macro photography with them, and it seems to do pretty well.
Wow. So reconnecting. I mean, not to get too deep into the Lego thing, which we'll do later. But is this, and not to get too emotional about it, did you reconnect because you felt a connection with Legos to your mom? Or was or is this something completely?
It's a reconnection to the childhood.
Got it.
And, I did a post on Instagram a while ago about why we collect, and I think
right.
A lot of people might look at comic book collectors, cosplayers, Legos, pop vinyls, whatever people collect,
yes.
Pet rocks, whatever it is. There's some type of connection.
Do people still collect pet rocks?
I'm sure they do. I won't judge them if they do.
All right, listen. This is a judgment-free zone.
Exactly.
All right, try to make it a judgment-free zone. So yeah. So well, listen. We appreciate you coming on the show. We brought you on because of your expertise in nerd culture as well. We know that you enjoy not just collecting, but you also enjoy movies. Comics. There you go. All kinds of fun stuff. And you're also a. Would it be safe to say you're also a computer geek as well?
Yes.
Okay, good.
On the software or the software side, not the hardware.
Okay, good. On the software side,
software side.
All right, you're a savant.
Well, I'm the first part of that, the idiot.
Oh, you're the idiot savant part.
Yeah,
all right. Well, listen, thanks for joining us this morning for our podcast. The NerdWatch Nation, of course, is recorded every week here, and we talk about the latest and greatest in nerd culture. But before we get officially started on the NerdWatch Nation formally, we want to address something that is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and that is the death of Mr. Robin Williams and how it affects, I guess, the geek culture, because he's very much connected to the geek culture. What a lot of people don't know about him is not just his movies have connected to most people in the nerd realm, but he also was a gamer.
Yeah.
He was a World of Warcraft gamer.
He's being immortalized too.
You know what? I read that. I thought that was I didn't know if that was a real deal.
It passed the petition, and they're going to make him an NPC in the game.
Really?
And he will tell some of his most famous jokes.
That is fantastic, because I know that I didn't know what server he played on, but I know that he was a big World of Warcraft player, and I know that he himself was kind of a nerd.
Big time. His daughter's name is Zelda. And
yes.
The Legend of Zelda.
Yes.
He was very much into artificial intelligence. That's one of the reasons that he was so adamant to be in Spielberg's film with the same name. This is a guy who always was such a real techie.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is that to kind of address before we get into remembering him, to kind of address his death. He was, I guess, he was suffering from a bout of depression, and most of the time, for me, I'm always my meter when it comes to people committing suicide. Not to get too heavy here, but I'm always have a neutral kind of attitude towards it. Well, sometimes people say that they're being selfish because they're taking away from the family or their friends or whatever. Sometimes there are judgments for that, and I can see that argument sometimes. But in the case of Robin Williams, he knew that he had a problem, and he was willing to address it, and he was willing to bring it out into the open, and he was willing to get himself help. And I think that was one of the interesting things about this whole situation is that he knew he had an issue, he knew he had a problem, he tried to get as much help as he could, and I think that is, in and of itself, I think that's a testimony to if you're dealing with depression, there's nothing wrong with trying to find help.
Right.
And I think if there is anything that you can take away from his death, even though he did commit suicide, is the fact that it's okay to look for help, and there are people willing to help you.
Right.
So in that respect, I have to say that, like I said, most of the time my meter's at a neutral level when it comes to these kind of suicide issues. But I have to say the fact that he went to seek help is very important.
It is.
And if there is an issue with people out there, please feel free to get yourself help. Don't be ashamed of it. People are willing and ready to help you if those problems arise, and if you feel that way, for sure. But moving on to his life. And to his work, I should say. There are things that he impacted my life more than I thought he did. I always thought he was a great comedian, but one of the things that I know of Robin Williams, of course, I grew up with Mork Mindy, which is pretty much, I think, all three of us, don't you think?
Yeah,
you too, Matt? You or
I didn't watch it, but
you know of it.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I grew up with Mork and Mindy, and that was a big thing for me. I had followed his career a lot, but I think for myself, what really changed my opinion of him, and ironically, it was the reason, it's actually, ironically, one of the reasons why I got into the business that I was in, which was radio, and that's Good Morning Vietnam. That impacted my life a lot, because I always thought to myself, man, I would love to do this, but I could never do this. And I think that was one of the films that Robin Williams, I really connected. And to this day, I still love it. I ended up watching it last night. For me, Robin Williams has a plethora. He's got a huge filmography. But for me, Good Morning Vietnam kind of changed the game as far as seeing him in a different light. Because not only was he funny, but he was also was a dramatic actor in that movie. And that really inspired my future career path, which is kind of interesting in an indirect way, because I never thought that would be something I would want to do, but I did, and it was one of the reasons why I got into radio. So for me, that would be the one. What about you, Professor Barry?
Let's talk about Good Morning Vietnam for just a minute here, because this was the game changer for him. This was one of the things I love about his career. This was one guy who kind of suffered what a lot of comedians were going through. There was a period where Hollywood, not to mention arts and entertainment in general, didn't know what to do with guys like this.
Right.
Now, if you're a successful comedian, you'll probably get a sitcom. You'll end up on SNL. You'll probably get a movie deal. But this was at a point where you had guys who were really interesting, really unique, like Richard Pryor, like George Carlin.
Right.
They didn't know what the heck to do with these guys. They didn't know what kind of movies to do with them. So when you look at Robin Williams' early films, I'm a fan of Popeye, as are a lot of people. I'm a fan of Moscow and the Hudson. But a lot of the early films he did, this was a guy who they didn't know what to cast him as.
Right.
So he did movies like The Survivors or Club Paradise, where it's like, what is he doing here? What is his role here? They didn't really know what to do with him. Good Morning Vietnam is such a perfect vehicle for him, because yes, not only is one of our best, truly one of the best stand-up comedians we ever had, but this is also a guy who was Juilliard trained, who was a really good dramatic actor. And you're right, like, it's funny that we don't really remember that movie is not a comedy. It's hilarious, but it's not a comedy. It's actually one of the best films, one of the best war films.
Right.
It's one of the best movies that Barry Levinson ever did.
Yes.
And it is a perfect showcase for him. And it showed right off the bat this guy was capable of so much more than just being the funny guy.
It's interesting. I consider that a film that is, without a doubt for me, an essential film when it comes to looking at the Vietnam conflict. like Apocalypse Now, like Platoon. I put Good Morning Vietnam in those same categories, but on a different plane. You see, in Platoon and in Apocalypse Now, you see it from the battlefield, but when you see it from behind the lines, that was another interesting view of it. And I put it in the same category. And I tell you what, that for me was one of his best movies, without a doubt. I mean, you mentioned Club Paradise, which is great. Doesn't get enough credit. That was directed by Harold Ramis.
Yep.
And I also like the movie that he was in with Kurt Russell. Best of Times. I thought that was a lot of fun myself. Now, Collector J. I like calling him Collector J.
That's
by
nice.
The way. I'm feeling that.
He's gonna mix some beats for us.
Yeah. So for you, sir, were you a fan of Robin Williams?
Oh yeah, I remember as a teenager, I actually told myself that's a guy I want to meet one day.
Sure.
And and see in the stand-up or just in person.
Sure.
But one of the movies that touched me the biggest, and for reasons stated earlier, was actually Patch Adams.
Ah.
That's my favorite. His stand-up comedy was also something I like to watch because it was completely different than his movies.
Yes.
And then Death to Smoochie was a fun one.
I tell you what, only Danny DeVito could come up with something as sick as Death to Smoochie. And I tell you what, it is. I will say this: it's a very underrated movie.
Yeah. But it showed his ability to do. And then last night I started watching The World's Greatest Dad.
Oh, that is a great movie.
Great film he did.
Great movie.
I got halfway to it right after his son, and I stopped it because it was late. But it was also the parallels between now and that movie.
Oh, sure,
too great.
Absolutely. You know what's funny about that film? Bobcat Goldthwait directed that film.
Directed it,
and he really has a good handle on. Bobcat has a good handle on Robin Williams and what he's good at.
Yeah. And
I think that he really hit a home run with World's Greatest Dad. I think that's a completely underrated film. Not a lot of people have seen it. It's not exactly. It's actually kind of disturbing. In most respects. Also, I want to address a couple other things. Like you said, World's Greatest Dad is another great film, but we also got to remember this is the same guy who was creepy as heck in 1 Hour Photo. Which is another great movie. I also think that he's extremely underrated in Insomnia with Al Pacino. Do you remember that film?
Of course.
You ever see that, Collector J?
I may have.
Great movie. It's based on a Swedish film with Stellan Skarsgård.
Yeah.
Insomnia is a fantastic film, and that really, for me, I think after seeing that, I had a whole different picture of Robin Williams as a dramatic actor because he was good at playing a real good creep. You know, he really personified those characters whenever he played them, whatever it was. So I really have to say that not realizing it until, of course, they pass, how impactful their work is on your life, especially for the nerd community, because he's been in other films that we haven't even mentioned, like Jumanji, which is one of his bigger films. Patch Adams, yeah, right. Right. Yeah.
He was actually supposed to reprise that role.
Mrs. Doubtfire. You're right. They were talking about reprising him in that movie. Also, he's in he's in Hook, which is another one of his great films, which he was panned for, and not a lot of no pun intended, but not a lot of critics enjoyed that film. But it was I thought it was decent nonetheless. It does have a following for sure. Yeah. So yeah, and like you said, he also gets criticized a lot for Patch Adams because it's a little schmaltzy.
Very schmaltzy.
Yeah, but I have to say that overall, I thought Patch Adams was a very good representation of his comedy and where he was. I thought Patch Adams overall was a pretty darn fun movie to watch, and I have to say that. At least for me, I don't know about the rest of you, I think that Robin Williams, after looking at his whole filmography, which I was doing for the last couple of days, he had more impact on my nerd culture life than I thought. You know what I mean? Mork and Mindy and until the end of his life. You know.
Well, I don't think a lot of people know that he actually really went after the Batman cinema. He wanted to be the Joker.
He did.
In '89, he was actually up for the running. And then he was also almost a shoo-in for the second movie.
Oh, the third movie.
The third movie.
Right, he wanted to be the Riddler.
Everyone left, and so the new Schumacher decided that Jim Carrey was going to be better.
Right.
And then the there was a rumor that he was going to be Hugo Strange in the Nolan verse.
Oh,
which, of course,
wow!
never
Which
came
would
to
have been
fruition.
great.
He was also considered for Joker too,
right?
In that one, so he really was into the geek
right,
culture.
Right.